Well, hello, dear viewer. I'm back once again with more spooks and scares for this year's Cryptid Week Halloween celebration, where, just like in years past, I do a little deep dive into the chosen cryptid's lore and rank it on the tier list based on if I'd eat said cryptid. If this is your first video of mine, welcome! I'm currently on a sort of break. I used to upload weekly, but for the rest of the year, it's just gonna be whenever I can. You know, personal stuff, being busy, you know how it is. However, we here on the channel plan to start 2026 off running. Now, something y'all should know as well, real quick. Apparently, most people are not watching YouTube regularly on Halloween for obvious reasons. And I still owe y'all an Iron Mouse theory as well, so here's the plan for this week. The Cryptid Halloween special will be today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, with the Iron Mouse video on Thursday, and we will not be uploading anything Friday due to Halloween. Now, for today's cryptid, we need to jump back to the year 1963. Many important events happened that year. My mom was born. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The first episode of Doctor Who premiered. But as these events were unfolding, something much darker was happening in the deep south of the United States. A retired air traffic controller named Harlan Ford would routinely take a small twin-engine plane and scout for potential hunting grounds and campsites that litter the marshlands of southern Louisiana. During one of these trips, he spotted what appeared to be an abandoned cabin, and so, after landing, he and his friend Billy Mills began patrolling through the Honey Island swamp to find the cabin. But instead of a cabin, they instead came face to face with a creature never before seen. The creature, described by Ford as ugly and sinister and looking like something out of a horror movie, kept eye contact with the men for a moment before escaping into the underbrush. This was the first recorded sighting of the Honey Island swamp monster. 11 years later, in 1974, Ford and Mills returned to the area on a duck hunting trip when, instead of finding ducks, they found several dead boars, each with their throats torn out. Initially, the pair thought the alligators had gotten to the boars, but apparently the carcasses were too far away from the water to be alligator attacks. And so, they believed the monster they had encountered over a decade prior was the culprit. This theory was backed up when Ford and Mills then found footprints around one of the boars. The footprints had come from a creature with 3 toes and webbing. The duo decided to leave before potentially encountering the creature once again, but they did go back later that night to make a cast of the footprint. Another man, named Ted Williams, claimed to have seen the creature many times and believed there were multiple swamp creatures living in the area. He once claimed that, quote-unquote, "I could have killed them, but I didn't, 'cause they didn't seem to want to harm me." However, one day, Ted took his boat out to set trout lines and was never seen again. One article mentioned this happened in 1975, but I couldn't find any confirmation on a date. The Honey Island swamp monster, also known as the Louisiana Wookiee or the Cajun Sasquatch, is believed to be over 7.5 feet tall and covered in thick matted hair and swamp weeds. It has yellow reptilian eyes, and apparently the smell it emits has been described as the stench of death. The creature has been blamed for the disappearances and deaths of local livestock and children. One theory of the creature's origin states that it was a Bigfoot who ended up in the swamps and evolved to fit the climate. Another, more out there theory is that there is a circus train that derailed in the early 20th century carrying exotic animals. The animals escaped into the marshlands, where they quickly perished due to the harsh climate, but a group of monkeys were able to survive. The monkeys, despite it being biologically impossible to do so, interbred with the local alligators, and thus the hairy reptilian Honey Island swamp monster was born. I couldn't make that up if I tried. It's also worth mentioning that the releases of Marvel's Man-Thing and DC's Swamp Thing may have had an influence somewhere there as well. This is mainly my own little pet theory, because Man-Thing and Swamp Thing both premiered in their comics in 1971, and both of those were apparently inspired by a 1942 Hillman periodicals character known as the Heap during the golden age of comics. So, we have a timeline where in 1942, Hillman periodicals drops The Heap, a comic about a swamp monster. Now, it's unknown if Ford and Mills read comic books, but in 1963, they first discovered the Honey Island swamp monster. In 1971, Marvel and DC both dropped their respective takes on a swamp monster, Man-Thing and Swamp Thing, and in 1974, Ford and Mills find the boars and the footprints and believe it to be the work of the Honey Island swamp monster. Then sometime after, Ted Williams goes missing in the swamp after claiming to have seen the creature many times before. Now, I'm not saying the creature doesn't exist, we do not know that for sure. But based on how popular comic books were during this era, it would not surprise me if the comic books influenced how Ford, Mills, and Williams remembered the creature, you know? They see it in the comic books, then years later they try to remember what they see, relate it to the comic books unknowingly, and that's how we get the descriptions that we got today. Potentially. Now, on to the tier list. As I mentioned, the creature is described as being hairy, covered in weeds, smells absolutely putrid, and has reptilian features. I can only assume it would be like eating an alligator skin purse, but also having to hold back my own vomit in the process. Now, normally as a result, I would put it in D tier for that alone. However, it's also known as the Cajun Sasquatch. And boy, do them Cajuns know how to season their food. So that's an automatic S tier for me. I'm sure some Cajun seasoning would be more than enough to make the Honey Island swamp monster worth eating. Plus, it lives in a swamp, and swamps get hot. It's essentially slow roasting and marinating itself every day, just waiting for us. But that's all I have for today. Tune in tomorrow for the next cryptid we cover for Cryptid Week 2025.